This one is called Sown. "It'll all be over soon," the spirit said. It wasn't ominous or threatening. It was almost jovial as the spirit of a scythe could be. "I'm going to die of hunger," Nadia said weakly, then stopped walking and stood in the silence, knowing that the spirit could not speak to her when the scythe was still. The blade of the forsaken tool lay on the ground behind her, dust-covered and chipped from being dragged from farm to farm across the countryside. She raised her face to the breeze, which refreshed her after walking in the hot August sun for so many miles while the spirit chased her. She took a deep breath, then started again down the road, giving the spirit its voice back. "That's not what I mean," it said. Its voice was the sound of the blade dragging along the gravel of the road. "They're meeting in Minsk right now." She turned to look at the spirit as she walked. Its luminous face was the reflection of the sky on the blade as it jagged and bounced. "That doesn't mean anything for me," she said. "They talk, and then they stop talking, and things will be no better for me." "The Great War is over," it said somberly. "Ha," she said, without really laughing. "It's over for them, maybe." Then she lifted the blade into the air. It was more difficult to carry this way, as it was heavy, and she was weak with hunger, but its voice became limited to the sound of the wind running over the pits and cracks in the metal, a sound much easier to ignore. Nadia wondered at the motives of the spirit today. It seemed to be less dour than usual. Yesterday, and every day before, it foretold only doom, and spoke to her only of death and misery. Today it almost seemed cheery, like it wanted her to hope. Perhaps it did. Perhaps it would derive some satisfaction from seeing her hope only to have it dashed. She set her jaw and reminded herself how poorly her morning had gone. When she walked up to the farm, one she'd reliably found work at all season, the farmer had looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her too thin waist, her knotted and dirty hair, and told her that they did not need her help today. There was another farm a mile or so ahead that might give her a midday meal in exchange for a few hours' labor in their cornfields. She would leave the scythe to rest against the gate and work rhythmically, mechanically, without the blade's voice to nag her. Afterward, they would give her a round of bread, an ear of corn, and a few berries for a meal. If she was lucky, perhaps there would be half of a sausage. She wasn't often lucky. The nearly noon sun glinted off the blade and shone the spirit's face onto the ground at her feet as she walked. Its mouth quirked as the blade whispered to her insistently, "The famine will be at an end soon." "You are trying to fool me," she said, and grunted as she lowered the blade back to the ground so that she would not have to look at the spirit's face. Its voice became loud again. "In a year you will have plenty again, as you had when you were a child." "A year," she snorted. "We'll see if I survive the week." "You will have a loving husband, and soon after you will be blessed with happy children, who will grow to be happy men and women in glorious new Latvia." "Not even a spirit could see such things," she said. She wanted to ignore the spirit's words, but she didn't know how. She was too weak. She found herself fantasizing, against her will, of the life the rattling blade promised her. "Independent Latvia will not last the decade," she insisted, repeating arguments she'd heard fervent young men spouting in the fields. "The separatists and Polke are just playing at what would we like to make a government. Any moment soldiers will come from somewhere and their little games will be over." "You are wrong, Nadia," the jovial note was back. "Latvia will flourish." "Quit your lies, demon!" she shouted. The spirit seemed to go quiet for a bit then, letting its rattling voice lapse into the simple noise it was. She heard wheels coming up behind her on the road and stopped to look. A small man was driving a small cart behind a small horse. She hoped he hadn't heard her outburst. Embarrassed, she waited by a tree and watched the dust rise up behind the cart as it approached and passed her. The driver nodded to her, expressionless, as he rode by. She stole a glance at his cargo and saw a few underripe, undersized melons there, probably bound for the market in Riga. As the dust settled, she lifted the scythe up in front of her, resting the end of the tool's handle in the dirt beside the road. The breeze stilled. The sun disappeared behind a cloud. The spirit had no voice for its false promises, no face to leer at her. Slowly, gingerly, she leaned the thing against the tree and walked away. At long last, she was unburdened. She could move without its weight bearing her down. She would be free. She would live. "Take my scythe wherever you go," her father's dying words came back to her. "Without it, you will not survive the coming days." She stopped, breath ragged, eyes wet with tears, fists down at her sides, trembling. She turned and ran the few steps back to the tree, and grabbed up the handle of the wretched thing, letting the ruined blade drop back to the road. "You will die before the season is out," the spirit rasped at her. "You will shrivel with hunger and lie dead in the gutter beside this very road." "Yes, I know," she said, wiping the tears from her face, forcing her jagged frown into a flat line. She pulled her free hand through her hair, straightened her tattered blouse and skirt. She wanted to look worth feeding when she arrived at the next farm. The spirit of the scythe laughed and laughed.